The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floor of the Hartwell Industries building. Outside, the city was already alive with the sound of honking cars and chattering pedestrians. But inside the towering glass structure, everything moved with quiet precision. Employees in crisp suits hurried through the lobby, their footsteps echoing softly against the polished stone. On the 42nd floor, behind a set of heavy oak doors, sat the corner office of James Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer of one of the most successful companies in the city. The office was exactly what one might expect from a millionaire businessman. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the skyline, while expensive artwork adorned the walls. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than most people earned in a month. James sat behind his desk, reviewing quarterly reports with the same intense focus that had built his empire. At 38 years old, he had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of. His company employed thousands of people. His name appeared regularly in business magazines, and his bank account had more zeros than he sometimes bothered to count. Yet, as he stared out at the city below, a familiar emptiness settled in his chest. Success, he had learned, was a lonely companion. His assistant, Margaret, knocked gently on the door before entering. She was a woman in her 50s who had worked for the company for nearly 2 decades, and her efficiency was legendary throughout the building. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, adjusting her glasses as she consulted her tablet. "Your 10 o'clock appointment is here." The Henderson account? James nodded, not looking up from his papers. The Henderson account was worth millions to the company, and he had been preparing for this meeting all week. "Send them in," he replied, his voice carrying the authority that came with years of commanding boardrooms. Margaret hesitated for just a moment. "Sir, there's been a slight change in circumstances." This caught James's attention. He looked up, his steel-gray eyes focusing on his assistant. In all their years of working together, Margaret rarely seemed uncertain about anything. "What kind of change?" he asked. Before Margaret could respond, the office door opened wider, and instead of the team of suited executives James expected to see, a small figure appeared in the doorway. It was a little girl, no more than 6 years old, with golden blonde hair tied back in 2 neat pigtails. She wore a simple white dress with small flowers printed on it, and her tiny hands clutched a worn teddy bear. James blinked, certain he was seeing things. He looked from the child to Margaret, then back to the child, his mouth opening slightly in surprise. The little girl stepped into the office with remarkable confidence for someone so small. Her bright blue eyes took in the impressive surroundings, but she seemed more curious than intimidated. She walked directly toward James's desk, her small shoes making soft tapping sounds on the hardwood floor. "Hello," she said in a clear, sweet voice. "Are you Mr. Mitchell?" James was speechless for a moment. In all his years in business, through countless meetings, negotiations, and presentations, he had never encountered anything quite like this. He glanced at Margaret, who stood in the doorway, looking as bewildered as he felt. Yes," James managed to say, his usual composure temporarily shaken. "I'm James Mitchell, and you are—" The little girl smiled brightly, a gap visible where one of her front teeth should have been. "I'm Emma Henderson," she announced proudly. "My mom's sick today, so I came instead." The words hit James like a physical blow. Henderson, the account he had been preparing for all week, the millions of dollars in potential revenue. And instead of the business executives he expected, he was facing a 6-year-old child. Margaret stepped forward, clearly flustered. "Mr. Mitchell, I tried to explain to security, but she was so insistent, and she knew all the details about the appointment." James held up a hand to stop Margaret's explanation. His mind was racing, trying to process this unusual situation. He looked down at Emma, who stood patiently by his desk, still clutching her teddy bear and smiling up at him with complete trust. "Emma," he said gently, leaning forward slightly, "can you tell me more about your mom being sick?" Emma's expression grew a bit more serious, though her smile didn't completely fade. "She has the flu," she explained matter-of-factly. "She's been coughing a lot and has a fever. The doctor said she needs to stay in bed for a few days." "And who brought you here?" James asked, glancing toward the door. "I took the bus," Emma replied casually, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "Mom always talks about her important meeting with Mr. Mitchell today. She's been working really hard on her presentation for weeks. When she couldn't get out of bed this morning, she was crying because she thought she would disappoint everyone." James felt something shift in his chest. The image of this small child navigating the city alone, determined to keep her mother's commitment, was both touching and alarming. "Emma," he said carefully, "where exactly do you and your mom live?" "About 20 minutes on the bus," she answered. "Mom works really hard. She has 3 jobs, but she says this meeting is the most important thing that's ever happened to us." The pieces began falling into place for James. Henderson wasn't the large corporation he had assumed. It was a single mother, probably a small business owner or entrepreneur, who had somehow managed to secure a meeting with him. The realization made him feel both impressed and slightly ashamed of his assumptions. Margaret cleared her throat softly. "Sir, what would you like me to do? Should I call social services or—" "No," James said quickly, his protective instincts surprising even himself. "Emma, would you like to sit down?" He gestured to one of the leather chairs across from his desk. Emma climbed up into it, her legs dangling several inches from the floor. She arranged her teddy bear carefully on her lap and looked at James expectantly. "What's your teddy bear's name?" James asked, buying himself time to think. "Mr. Buttons," Emma replied, holding up the worn toy. "He comes to all the important meetings with us. Mom says he's good luck." James smiled, despite himself. "He looks very professional." Emma giggled, a sound that seemed to brighten the entire office. "Mom practices her presentations with him sometimes. She says Mr. Buttons is a very good listener." "I'm sure he is." James leaned back in his chair, studying the remarkable little girl before him. "Emma, can you tell me about your mom's business?" Emma's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Oh yes. Mom makes the most beautiful cakes and cookies you've ever seen. She can make flowers out of frosting that look so real you want to smell them. And she makes birthday cakes that look like castles and race cars and princess dresses." She paused to take a breath, then continued with growing excitement. "Mom says if she could get a big contract, like maybe making desserts for fancy parties or offices, we could move to a nicer apartment." James felt his heart constrict. The picture Emma was painting was becoming clearer with each word. A single mother working 3 jobs, talented enough to dream of building something better, but struggling to make ends meet. And here was her daughter, so devoted and mature beyond her years that she had taken it upon herself to keep this crucial appointment. "That sounds wonderful," James said softly. "Your mom must be very talented." "She is," Emma agreed enthusiastically. "She went to cooking school before I was born, but then Daddy left and she had to work other jobs to pay for everything. But she never stopped making beautiful cakes." The casual mention of an absent father hit James harder than he expected. He thought about his own childhood, raised by a single mother who had worked tirelessly to give him opportunities. The memory of his mother's sacrifices had been buried under years of corporate success. But Emma's story brought it all rushing back. "Emma," James said gently, "do you have your mom's phone number with you?" Emma nodded and carefully pulled a small piece of paper from her dress pocket. "Mom wrote it down for me in case of emergencies. She made me memorize it too." James took the paper and looked at Margaret, who was still standing in the doorway, now watching the scene with obvious emotion. "Margaret, could you please call Mrs. Henderson? Let her know that Emma is safe and that we're having our meeting." "Of course, sir," Margaret replied, stepping out of the office. While Margaret made the call, James turned his attention back to Emma. "So tell me more about these cakes your mom makes. What makes them so special?" For the next 20 minutes, Emma regaled James with stories about her mother's creations. She described wedding cakes that looked like fairy tale castles, birthday cakes shaped like favorite cartoon characters, and delicate cookies decorated with intricate designs. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and James found himself genuinely interested in hearing every detail. "Mom has a whole photo album of all the cakes she's made," Emma continued. "She brings it everywhere in case someone wants to see her work. I brought it today too." She reached into a small backpack James hadn't noticed before and pulled out a well-worn photo album. She climbed down from her chair and walked around to James's side of the desk, completely comfortable in his presence now. "See," she said, opening. James looked down at the photograph and felt his breath for a little girl's princess party. The cake was absolutely stunning. It was a perfect replica of a fairy tale castle, complete with delicate towers, intricate details, and what looked like hand-painted decorations. The level of artistry was extraordinary. "This is incredible," James said, his voice full of genuine admiration. "Your mom made this." Emma beamed with pride. "Huh, and look at this one." She turned the page to reveal a wedding cake that looked like something from a high-end bakery. Multiple tiers were decorated with cascading sugar flowers that looked completely real. The attention to detail was remarkable. Page after page revealed similar masterpieces. James realized he was looking at the work of someone with exceptional talent, someone who should have been running a successful bakery instead of working 3 jobs to make ends meet. Margaret returned to the office, her expression soft with compassion. "Mr. Mitchell, I spoke with Mrs. Henderson. She's extremely worried and apologetic. She had no idea Emma had left the apartment." "Is she feeling well enough to talk?" James asked. "She sounds quite ill, but she's desperate to speak with you. She's afraid this incident has ruined any chance of working together." James looked down at Emma, who was still proudly showing him her mother's work. An idea was beginning to form in his mind, something that went far beyond a simple business transaction. "Margaret, please tell Mrs. Henderson that Emma is perfectly safe and that we'll be bringing her home shortly. Also, Let her know that we'd like to reschedule our meeting for next week when she's feeling better." "Of course, sir." James turned back to Emma. "These cakes are absolutely beautiful. Your mom is incredibly talented." "I know," Emma said matter-of-factly. "That's why I knew you would want to meet her, even if she was sick." The simple logic of a 6-year-old somehow made perfect sense. James realized that this child had more business instinct than many of the executives he dealt with on a daily basis. "Emma, I have an idea," James said, making a decision that surprised even himself. "How would you and your mom like to have lunch with me next week? We can talk about her business, and maybe I can try one of her famous cakes." Emma's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? You mean it?" "I absolutely mean it," James replied. "But first, we need to get you home to your mom. She's worried about you." Emma nodded, suddenly looking a bit sheepish. "I probably should have asked permission to come here by myself." "Probably," James agreed with a gentle smile. "But I'm very glad you did. You're a very brave and loyal daughter." As they prepared to leave, James found himself looking around his office with new eyes. The expensive furniture and impressive views seemed less important. Somehow, the real value in this room today hadn't been in the quarterly reports or profit projections. It had been in the wisdom and love of a small child who had risked everything to protect her mother's dreams. The ride to Emma's apartment was an eye-opening experience for James. The neighborhood was far from the affluent areas where he usually spent his time. The buildings were older, showing signs of wear, but there was a sense of community that his wealthy neighborhood lacked. Children played in small parks while their parents watched from nearby benches, and local shops displayed handwritten signs advertising their services. Emma chattered happily during the drive, pointing out landmarks that were important to her world. The library, where her mom took her every Saturday. The small grocery store where they did their shopping. The park where they fed the ducks on sunny afternoons. "That's our building," Emma announced, as they pulled up to a modest brick apartment complex. "We live on the 3rd floor. Mom likes it because we can see the sunset from our window." James helped Emma out of the car and walked with her to the building entrance. The lobby was small but clean, with a community bulletin board covered in notices about lost pets, babysitting services, and local events. As they climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, James noticed Emma's energy beginning to flag slightly. The adventure of the day was catching up with her, and he realized she was probably getting hungry and tired. Emma stopped in front of apartment 3B and knocked softly. "Mom, it's me. I'm back." The door opened immediately, revealing a woman who was clearly Emma's mother. Despite being obviously ill, with flushed cheeks and tired eyes, she was beautiful in a natural, unpretentious way. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore comfortable clothes that suggested she had indeed been resting in bed. "Emma," she said, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "I was so worried about you. You can't just leave like that without telling me." "I'm sorry, Mom," Emma said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "But I didn't want you to miss your important meeting." Over Emma's head, the woman's eyes met James's. He could see a mixture of embarrassment, gratitude, and apprehension in her gaze. "Mrs. Henderson," James said gently, extending his hand. "I'm James Mitchell, and you have a remarkable daughter." "I'm Sarah Henderson," she replied, shaking his hand while still keeping one arm around Emma. Mr. Mitchell, I am so sorry about this. I had no idea she had left. If I had known. Please don't apologize, James interrupted. Emma has given me one of the most interesting meetings of my career. She showed me your portfolio, and I have to say, your work is absolutely extraordinary. Sarah's expression shifted from embarrassment to surprise. She showed you my portfolio. Every page, James confirmed. You're incredibly talented. I'd love to discuss some business opportunities with you when you're feeling better. You, you still want to meet, even after all this, James smiled, glancing down at Emma, who was beaming with pride. Mrs. Henderson, your daughter traveled across the city on her own because she believed in you and your work. That kind of loyalty and dedication tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are. Yes, I definitely want to meet. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, whether from emotion or her illness. James couldn't tell. Thank you, she whispered. This means more to me than you could possibly know. Why don't you get some rest? James suggested. I'll have my assistant call you early next week to set up a proper meeting, and maybe Emma can show me more of those photo albums. Emma perked up at this suggestion. Can I bring Mr. Buttons to that meeting too? I insist on it, James replied seriously. Every good business meeting needs a professional consultant like Mr. Buttons. Emma giggled and hugged her teddy bear tighter. As James prepared to leave, Sarah caught his arm gently. Mr. Mitchell, I don't know how to thank you. Most people would have called security when a 6-year-old showed up for a business meeting. James paused, considering her words. Mrs. Henderson, I've learned something today that I had forgotten. Sometimes the most important things in life come in the smallest packages. Emma reminded me of that as he walked back down the stairs and out to his waiting car. James felt a lightness in his step that had been missing for years. The empty feeling that had plagued him that morning was gone, replaced by something he hadn't felt in a long time, genuine excitement about the future. On the drive back to his office, James found himself thinking not about quarterly profits or market shares, but about a little girl's unwavering faith in her mother, and a talented woman who deserved a chance to build something beautiful. By the time he reached his office building, James had made several decisions. He was going to offer Sarah Henderson a contract that would change her life. But more than that, he was going to make sure that Emma's brave journey that morning would be remembered as the day everything changed for their small family. The sun was setting over the city as James sat in his office, looking out at the same view he had contemplated that morning. But everything looked different now. The glass towers and busy streets weren't just symbols of commerce and ambition anymore. They were part of a community where small acts of courage and love could create ripples that changed everything. He picked up his phone and called Margaret. Margaret, I need you to clear my schedule for next Friday afternoon. I want to have a very special lunch meeting with Sarah and Emma Henderson. And Margaret, make sure we order the meeting lunch from the best restaurant in the city. I have a feeling we're going to be celebrating the beginning of something wonderful. As he hung up the phone, James smiled to himself. Sometimes the most important business deals weren't made in boardrooms or over expensive dinners. Sometimes they were made when a little girl with a teddy bear reminded a successful man what really mattered in life. And sometimes, just sometimes, everyone involved got exactly what they needed.